Did you know that in the very earliest days of the church, before Christians were even called Christians, they were just called followers in the way of Christ, that most people thought they were cannibals? And here's why. One, because they would get together at least once a week and eat the body and blood of Christ. But also because people noticed that when a Christian community would spring up in their town or city or village, that suddenly all the orphaned children who normally would beg on the street, all of them would disappear. And so the first thing that people assumed was that these Christians were actually eating kids. What of course they were really doing was taking in the orphans, adopting them as their own children, and caring for them. But 2,000 years ago, the idea of charity, of doing something kind and loving just because it was the right thing to do, that was so bizarre, so foreign to the culture of the Roman Empire, that it made more sense to assume that people were cannibals than to assume they would show kindness to orphan children. Now, there have been many times throughout the history of the church and in the lives of individual Christians when we have failed to be a loving people, and we need to own up to that. But there are also many times in our history that we can be proud of the witness that we have put into the world by our example. In times of great distress and in times of great injustice, the abolitionist movement of the 18th and 19th century was primarily led by Christians. The civil rights movement of the 1960s that was led by the African American church. And even more recently, at the very beginning of the HIV pandemic, when we didn't know how HIV was spread, when Christians from Catholic nuns in San Francisco to Southern Baptist preachers in the Carolinas decided that they would put their own lives at risk and care for those who were dying of AIDS. Not because they thought that God would magically protect them or shield them from the disease because they were faithful, but because they believed that even if they did contract HIV and die from it, their lives weren't as important as the good work that needed to be done. I bring this up because there's a question that I've been asking a lot in the past couple of weeks, and I hope you'll ask it with me. And I'll be interested to see that the answers that we come up with prayerfully together. Decades from now, long after the coronavirus pandemic is a memory, how do we hope that people will tell the story of the church during this time? What do we hope the church's contribution will be? Will people remember us as loving our neighbor, as being a safe and non-judgmental community for them? What can we do to make sure that our legacy in this time as followers in the way of Christ is one that we can celebrate in years to come? And I think it begins with the attitude that has carried through all the best moments of the Christian faith. And that is starting with an attitude of other-centered love. That what I want, what I need, is not as important as what the world needs from us. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, through every moment of his ministry, through his death, and even through his resurrection, your Son Jesus showed us what love looks like in action. During this time, when the world feels heavy and uncertain. Send your Holy Spirit to teach us to follow in his way, to do what is right even when it is hard, to practice forgiveness, gentleness, generosity, and above all, your love. Amen.